And if you can't climb every peak twice as fast as a man can, do you not count as well? So it was really important to me to write into that space.
Hi, I'm Beth Pipe, and I'm here today with Polly Atkin. Hello, Polly.
Hi there.
So Polly is a poet and non-fiction writer. Has published 3 poetry pamphlets, 2 collections, about actually so many things, and won awards and all sorts of things. And you're here at Kemble Mountain Festival.
I am indeed.
Can you tell us a little bit about what you've been up to at Kemble Mountain Festival? What have you been up to so far?
So far, I have interviewed Marshall Farrell about her amazing book, Uprooting, this morning. And then I've just really pottered around and looked at the bookstore, looked at all these amazing books, especially some which I hadn't seen yet in the flesh, in the pages, in the leaves.
Pages.
So that's been quite exciting.
Are you like a book nerd? So you're a book writer.
Yeah.
And how big's your, I'm on confessions there, how big's your to be read pile?
Oh my goodness. It is the size of my house, which is very small, but very crammed full of books. And it's just ever expanding as well, because there's the actual to be read pile, which is ever expanding. And then the virtual to be read pile, the things that I haven't even managed to get in the actual pile. And they really are piles. So our house is tiny. It's a 16th century cottage, and it's minuscule, but it's every surface, every inch of floor is just covered in piles of books.
Sounds perfect.
Well, it kind of is, but it's quite dangerous as well. So I have had an issue before where I was taking a poetry book off a shelf, and then all the other poetry books fell on my face. It actually gave me a bruised cheekbone. So poetry is dangerous and reading is dangerous. That's what I have learned.
I'm not sure that's the message quite that we're going for at the book festival this year, but you know,
I mean, it was also a mountain of poetry books, because it was a very tall shelf, absolutely covered in a kind of slate arrangement of slim collections, and they fell.
Oh well.
Which happens. It was like an avalanche of poetry.
Like an avalanche of books.
Yeah.
Because so as well as having a to be read pile, you've probably got a to be written pile.
Oh, I do.
A to be written pile, but obviously I'm making the link here. We're here today to talk a bit about the book that you have written.
We
I have read called. I'm just talking out of my head. Sometimes some people just fall. Is it something like that? Isn't it?
Some of us just fall.
That was it. Yeah, something along those lines. We should put it there.
I love that. Sometimes I think that I deliberately make titles which are slightly confusing to people. I'm talking being a book geek. I am a massive title geek, and titles are really important to me.
Oh, right.
But I have over the years heard people garble all of my titles in really impressive ways, and Some of Us Just Fall is definitely one of those. That people like. I know it's something to do with falling. I know it's something to do with people, but in what way? We don't know.
But I've read it, I promise. And it's, we're talking about it. So do we just give us a heads up about what's the book about? Can you just give us an overview of what's in the book?
Yeah, so it's a mixture of nature writing and memoir, and it's about my experiences of living with chronic illness, which are genetic, but not knowing about them until I was in my 30s. So I'd been ill all of my life, but people had told me that there was nothing wrong with me. And it had completely directed my life. So it had changed what I decided to do. It had changed how I live. And it changed what I wanted to do with my time and how I want to live as well.
Yeah.
But I didn't know why that was happening until I was 34, 35. So
it's been so frustrating for you to just be having to make these choices, but not really understanding what the cause of these choices was.
Yeah, completely. Because when you don't know what the cause is, you think, as people continually tell you, that it's your own fault as well, that it's something you've done wrong, something that you're not doing right, that you're not living in a correct way, you're not eating right, you're not acting right, that you want to be ill, which is what doctors tell you over and over again when you have one of these conditions.
And I know when I read it, I swore at the book quite a lot. And this is no reflection on your writing, which was just obviously as beautiful as ever, but I was swearing, and apparently that's not an uncommon reaction.
No, there's been a lot of swearing, there's been a lot of crying, there have been accidents that have happened.
Oh my goodness.
So one of the symptoms of my conditions are that I'm actually pathologically clumsy, so I have a very distorted sense of space and of my body in space, which is a proprioception. And so one of the things that I write about in the book is that I drop things and drop myself and fall over things a lot. And that started to happen to people who were reading the book as well. So it's a kind of reader effect, I think is what we think of it in academic terms, but a kind of haunting of the reader. That if you're not careful, you will start smashing teacups and walking into things purely through the act of reading this book.
So far, let's just recap. Books are bad for you because they fall on you.
They fall on you, they're dangerous, and you might get haunted by them and have a kind of strange haunting experience. Although this is what happens when I read as well. Sometimes I do have those experiences.
So I feel like I should ask now, are there any positives? Are there any positives that came from the
completely.
experience?
So I've had a lot of people, other people who are disabled or people who are chronically ill who have written to me to say that they've found themselves represented in a book for the first time, or that they've really felt seen in the book. And some people who it's helped them to understand things that have gone on in their own lives as well. Also, people who have said it has helped them understand other people in their lives as well, which I think is really important. So those are the two main things I wanted to come out of the book, that it would give that feeling of recognition to people who have similar experiences, but also show people who don't have those experiences what it's like from inside. And one of the ones that really meant something to me actually was bizarrely an Amazon review that there was someone who just wrote and said, this is the first time I've seen hemochromatosis written about. Wow. And I can now tell people what it's like because I can point
to the book.
Yeah.
Because you've got the words, and I think that's the beauty of being a writer. You've got the words to express things that other people who may be going through the same thing can't express. So that they can point and like, this is the thing, this is what I've been trying to tell you.
And that's what I thought after my diagnosis, and because I was so relieved to know what was wrong and have a name and have an understanding of it, and also know what could be done to alleviate some of my symptoms. But I was also really angry that it had taken that long, and really frustrated that was the same situation that a lot of people had. And I thought, well, what can I do about that? I can write about it because it's what I do. That's the one thing I do know how to do, and I can do even though I have all this pain and energy limitation. I can still write about it. And
the people that you've spoken to, obviously in the book you describe your route to diagnosis, and then it was full of pitfalls and frustrations and all sorts of other things. When you've spoken to other people, has that been a common experience? Has that been like a shared experience?
Yeah, so common, which I knew even before my diagnosis as well, because I'd read other people's similar accounts in different ways. But once I knew my specific conditions, I found out that the lag time for diagnosis was kind of 5 to 10 years for most people. And as soon as you become multiply marginalized, so it takes longer for women than for men, it takes longer for women of color, it takes longer for transgender people, it goes on and on. So the more marginalized you are, the more outside the center of the bodily norm you are, the longer it takes as well. And that it's just such a common story. So all the things I write about could be other people's stories as well.
And it just so frustrating.
Yeah, so frustrating.
Obviously, this being an outdoorsy festival, it might be quite nice to make some connections with the outdoors. And I'll start with this one first. You talked about the nature cure and the impossible pill. Can you just explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, so one of the reasons why I wanted to write this book in the way that I did in particular is because living in the Lake District, so much writing about the Lake District is about the outdoors, and it is about nature and our relationship with nature. But it's very much courting what I call in the book, borrowing a term, the wilderness body ideal. So this kind of outdoorsy figure who strides off into the distance and bags all of their Wainwrights. And has a relationship with the natural world where they go out into it and it gives them something in return. It makes them feel great. And then they go home. And I felt completely shut out of that discourse. Especially, I was thinking about this because the first event I ever did at Kendal Mountain Festival was with the anthology Waymakers, the vertebrate anthology. And I had submitted to that specifically because it was about women in the outdoors, and I wanted there to be a representation of people who weren't, and a lot of the discourse around it was, we want to prove we're just as strong as men.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, okay, but what happens if you're not?
Yeah.
And if you can't climb every peak twice as fast as a man can, do you not count as well? So it was really important to me to write into that space. And what I found more and more was that all of the writing about nature and health was about this idea that nature will cure us.
Yeah.
And for me, that's very problematic because my conditions are incurable.
Yeah.
As are many people's conditions. Chronic conditions, by their very nature, are incurable.
Yeah.
So what happens if we only think of our relationship with nature as something that we go to in order to cure us? I think it's very damaging both for us as people, but also for nature, because it puts us in a transactional relationship with it, where we're expecting nature to do something for us instead of just being.
Yeah.
I think we should just be really happy to live in and with and alongside the natural world and not expect anything of it, to have unconditional love for it instead of loving it for what it does for us.
Yeah.
Which I think is a really bad capitalist product of the way in which we live.
It's healthy in any relationship. You
is.
don't have a life partner going only because of what you can do for me.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You wouldn't stand for that in all. I hope you wouldn't stand for that in a human relationship. So why are we lauding that in our relationship with the natural world? I think we need to shift away from that. And that doesn't mean that we can't find solace and comfort and joy in the natural world, because a lot of people do that. But also thinking about the difference between therapy and cure, that, we're not actually eradicating disease by hugging a tree, alas. If only it was so simple.
Yeah. And you do write very movingly about nature, and some of the passages about the deer. And one of the things that particularly struck me was when you thought you were seeing the same deer in different places, and it was actually different deer.
Yes, those deer. Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I find. For me, I find a lot of knowledge and learning from the non-human creatures and beings that live in the same space as me. So the deer who live on the common by me feature a lot in the book. And even though I thought I was looking at them really closely, it took me a couple of months to realize that what I had thought was one pair of roe deer was actually 3 different pairs. And as soon as I realized that, I could see they were completely distinct from each other. They were utterly, like, how could I have looked at them and thought,
something
beautiful? I gave them all silly names, but beautiful. Obviously, common Bucky, who lived at the top, who was particularly proud, and then Ladywood Bucky, who had the most beautiful coronets on his antlers. The fluffiest. I shouldn't have favourites, but his antlers were the beautifulest and the best.
You're allowed to have favourites.
And then Garden Bucky, who is like much more shy and slimmer, and I thought they were all the same deer. And to me, that was also a lesson about how we look at the world, how we think about each other as well, the lack of attention that actually we pay when
we think we're paying attention.
Yeah, exactly.
You realise something.
Yeah.
You just get hit with that action maybe.
Exactly, because we don't have all the data, we don't have all the information, and we think we do. So for me, that was a really important lesson, to not assume that you know what you don't know.
Yeah. And one of the other things you do when you're outdoors, so you talk about walking outdoors, and I know we share a joy of swimming outdoors.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons we both like it is because you can't fall over in water. Yes. And I love that. I underlined that line in the book, so I felt.
So that's actually from Kate Davis.
Right,
really, another great Cumbrian writer, a poet and writer, who said in a tweet at one point, "I love swimming because you can't fall over in the water."
Yeah.
And I've adopted that from her.
And what is it
so
that you
important.
love about it? Because you're braver than I. you go in the harsher conditions. What is it that you particularly love about the?
So I really love that feeling of being, both the bodily feeling of being outside gravity. So with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, one of the comorbidities, the conditions that go alongside it, is dysautonomia. And for me, the autonomic nurse who deals with that actually said to me, gravity is your enemy. So you have to treat gravity like it's trying to ruin you in some way. So anything that removes you from gravity really helps. So essentially, when I stand up, all my blood falls to the bottom of my body.
That's inconvenient.
Yeah, it is inconvenient, and it takes quite a lot to kind of get it back up. So the kind of capillary action that's meant to happen doesn't happen because everything's too stretchy. Any kind of exercise that you can do that is horizontal. I won't talk about the other kinds other than swimming.
Well, a certificate to the film there.
Pilates.
Pilates. That's
Yeah.
exactly what we're talking about, yeah.
That was what we were talking about. So swimming is ideal because it removes the problem of gravity. But then outdoor swimming, which is what I really love.
Yeah.
So I've always loved swimming, and I love just being in the water, any kind of water, and have done since I was little. But swimming outdoors is also this extraordinary aesthetic experience, and that's part of what I really love, particularly about swimming in lakes. So my favorite lake weather is when it's absolutely flat still. So everything is reflected in the water.
Yeah.
So as I'm writing the book, then when you're swimming, and I swim breaststroke, so when you're pushing your arms out and moving them aside, you're literally moving the mountains and the sky.
That was a great line. I remember reading that. I love that line. And that's just exactly what it must be like. It's just doing... And obviously, we've talked about the nature cure as one thing, but actually, obviously, it's a therapy. It's still... It's helpful. So
Completely. And it's actually physiotherapy as well. It's
I'm just wondering, had anybody along... Is that something you discovered for yourself? Or did anybody ever along the way to your diagnosis say, hang on, this might be quite good for you?
No one suggested outdoor swimming, partly because I started doing it before it became a nature cure phenomena, actually. So I was already doing it before everybody started saying, cold water swimming will cure everything. And I was like, I'm still ill and I do it all the time. Who can I write to about this? When I was younger, swimming was suggested as an exercise, and it was suggested as an exercise which is good as a both gentle exercise that protects the joints and supports you in this way with air loss and loss. But I was also told when I was younger, I was told not to swim breaststroke because it might be worse for my knees. But I personally, I haven't particularly found that, and I still find it to be my favourite stroke to do. And actually, I have more problems with core and shoulders than I do with
knees,
breaststroke and knees, weirdly. Although walking and knees, bad.
Yeah, walking and knees, very bad.
But breaststroke and knees, fine. So I'm just a frog, essentially.
You're just a frog, basically, and that's fine.
Yeah.
Frogs are good. I've got one last question there before we wrap up, because I could literally sit all afternoon and talk to you. Obviously, one of the themes of the festival this year is joy.
Yeah.
What actually brings you joy out? I mean, we talked about, I feel like we've covered probably some of this already, but what does bring you joy outdoors?
So many things. I think joy, particularly joy for disabled people, is such an important thing. So often we're denied it. It's deemed to be something that we don't have. Disability seen as a really sad thing. And people don't expect there to be joy in our lives. But I get joy from everything. I'm like a 5-year-old, really. And I think this is how I survive through life in a lot of ways, that a certain quality of light will give me joy. Birds on the bird feeder will give me joy. A swim on a still day will give me a lot of joy. Sun on your face while swimming on a cold day, exceptional joy.
Exceptional joy.
So I think, but even like, a really beautiful acorn can like tiny things.
Conkers, I love conkers.
Yeah,
I love conkers. Give me
yeah,
joy.
Exactly.
Great
So
joy.
I think joys have to be gathered like small things. There's an amazing writer and artist, Letty McHugh, who writes about gathering, who has MS, and she writes about gathering joys and kind of sticking them in her pocket to save up for the winter. So yeah, I think we have to do that, saving up those small joys.
I think saving small joys in your pocket is a perfect way to end. Polly, thank you so much for talking to me. I'm sorry to cut us short because I could go all afternoon.
Thank you.
Hope you have the rest of an amazing festival.
Thank you.